because of Palestinian aspirations and because of the outright attacks that are taking place by Hamas and some of the other groups. I missed some of those attacks by a matter of days.
What's one of the closest calls that you experienced? Would that be it, or are there others that are even closer calls than that?
Just before coming into Israel, I was in Jordan for what was expected to be about 3 to 4 days at the most. I mainly wanted to see Petra. I think everybody knows Petra as the facade that you see in Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade, just before Indiana goes running in to meet that 700-year-old knight who's been guarding for 700 years the cup of Christ, the Holy Grail. Yeah. And in reality, you can't go inside. It's very fragile. They don't let people inside, but you can see the facade from the outside. And what's surprising is the rest of Petra looks very much like that. It's an amazing relief of carved in situ or in sight stone. Beautiful, beautiful red sandstone, and it's just a photographer's dream. But while I was there, I was coming back through something called the Wadi Run, which is kind of like Zion in Utah, with these big, huge bluffs, multicolored, rock-pitted, a lot of petroglyphs, things like that. And I ran into a taxi driver who at first couldn't proclaim his love for me enough. He just said, "Oh, I love you Americans. You guys are great." And he was supposed to drive me around for 3 hours. And what he did was drop me off. He said, "Well, you can walk over there." So I had to walk 100 yards through this soft sand over to this little creek that was supposed to be a big deal. And I came back, and instead of driving, he sent me over to his friend's tent for tea. And then when we got back from tea, he drove for about 15 minutes, and he stopped for a smoke. And then after driving about another 10 minutes, he stopped to pray. And then he stopped to have tea again. It was just this constant procession of stops. And I finally complained to him. And he snarled at me. He just jumped at me, and he said, "You know what? I never liked you from the beginning." And it was completely the opposite of what he gushed over in the beginning. And I said, "Well, you know, if you're going to keep doing this, if you're going to keep stopping, either I'm not going to pay you in full or I'm not going to pay you at all, because this is not what I paid for." And then he said, "You know, I'll just have to drop you off in the desert then." And he thought about it for a couple of minutes, and I said, "That'd be fine, and I wouldn't have to pay you at all." Finally, he leaned over and he said, "I think I will just kill you right here." And that was kind of shocking. I didn't take too much into it until he got into a cell phone, and 2 other guys in Land Rover showed up on either side, and then they started circling me, and that's when I learned to negotiate really fast. So I just said, I'll pay you. I'm done driving. I don't want to see any more. So I pay you in full. Just take me back to the village. We're done. And his buddies in their Land Rover followed for a while. I didn't get the best of that negotiation, but I got the winning end. Let's just put it that way. I'm here to help.
Your heartbeat and your adrenaline was definitely up on that one.
yeah, it was up. I've been an athlete all my life, and it has rarely got up as high as it did on that occasion. But it was interesting the way that he was so friendly and so gushing and so just, you know, as long as you do things on my terms, I love you Americans. But you want me to actually do my job? You actually want me to drive you around the thing you're paying me for? Oh God, no. We can't have that. And he was sort of offended that I didn't want to drink tea with his friends when we didn't have any language in common. He was the one that had the translation. So when he took off, there was really nothing that we could say to each other because I didn't know but 10 words of Arabic. And so it wasn't like I wasn't interested in talking to these lads. It's just that we couldn't communicate. And I really didn't want to do it for half an hour, 45 minutes. I wanted to talk to them for 10 minutes, say how much I admired Jordan and the Jordanian king and their Western approach to government and civilization, and then be gone and see the natural sights. And just, he didn't want to do that.
In visiting many different countries, are you seeing the Westernization, the importation of American culture, a gradual Westernization of different places?
Yeah. Let me give you an example. Hostels are really a better place to stay than hotels. They're less expensive. They've got more variety. You can stay in a bunk, multiple bed type situation. If you really want to save money, you can get your own room like a hotel. Have it be secure. Be able to lock your computer away and wander out in the streets and know you're not going to be ripped off. They usually have like music pits and a little cooking station where they'll offer up things like you would find at a happy hour, for example, and lots of beer and people from all over the world. And they're much more interesting than the people who stay at hotels. And you get a chance to press the flesh and talk with these people, and sometimes you make long-term friends. But I really enjoy that part of the experience. And in going into hostels in these different countries, you pick up a lot that you're not going to pick up at home necessarily, and you're not going to pick up. And they to answer your question, come back to your question, they all have Wi-Fi, for example, and they know they've got to compete in the world market to get Wi-Fi. So they have that, and so you can operate your computer. And they will have Western music most of the time, and most of them have adopted Western dress, except for the upper classes in Dubai, for example, where they wore traditional Arab headdress and white flowing robes and so forth. Almost everybody, Kathmandu, South Korea, Japan, almost everybody has adapted to Western-style clothing, unless they're part of a cultural village or something like that where they're showing off their traditional heritage. Western communications, Western language. English is the lingua franca of the entire world now, not only for business, but also for communications, for things like Facebook, culture, movies. Pretty much anything that's a hot button worldwide, it's going to be discussed in English. So a good portion of the world is either learning English or has already learned it, except when you need it the most. then it's nowhere to be found. But that just makes the trip interesting, though.
You notice any chain restaurants or chain stores, Larry, when you're traveling, or can you still find really authentic, meals and experiences pretty much everywhere you go?
Oh, in the bigger cities, when you find the chain stores and so forth, it kind of made inroads everywhere, really, like KFC, for example, and certainly McDonald's. And they may have adapted a little bit to Western culture with some adaptations, but you still have those. But on the other hand, in most of the smaller places, and even in larger places like Istanbul, you're always going to find the local authentic restaurants serving, Kenyan food or Thai food or Maasai food. What's I thinking of the particular grouping in Africa? Indian food. There's always going to be authentic restaurants everywhere. And then, of course, you eat on the bus sometimes, and the people will bring the food to you. And they see a white man on the bus, and you're the only white man you've seen in 3 to 5 days. And you go up, and it's like an electric light to them. They may ignore everybody else on the bus, and they'll pile on top of each other to get up to your window to hand you coconut water or nuts or corn, or I call it chicken emaciate, which is essentially emaciated chicken, but it's like chicken that has been out in the sun for 3 days that nobody wanted to eat. But they think that the stupid white gringo is going to eat that stuff. And honestly, sometimes you're desperate enough that you haven't had any protein, and your bus got in at 1 o'clock the night before, and you didn't eat, and so you just kind of genuflect a little bit and eat anyway.
You mentioned South Korea earlier. Tell me about North Korea. I understand you've also visited North Korea.
Yeah, I was really, really lucky, Rich, in that the timing when I was putting this trip together, North Korea had just opened up. And it didn't require a really long, extensive application or exam and a long look through. There's a group called Koryo Travel. They're really a British group, but they're based out of Beijing in China. And as an American, you cannot take the train through North Korea. Europeans can, but Americans have to fly in from Beijing to Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, and then you go in select groups. And they keep you together, and they watch you very closely. And they call it, quote unquote, single-minded unity. And that means basically keep your ass together and don't wander away from the group. But it is still an incredible trip and well worthwhile. And I just happened to have discovered it at the ideal time. And when I put this trip together, it was going to be 4 or 5 countries at first, and it just kept growing and growing and growing because, well, this country is just next to that country, and you always wanted to see that, and it's just another 3-hour bus trip or cheap airline ticket, and it went on and on like that to the point where instead of 7 countries, it was 36. And always with that notion that, well, this is just right next door to that, and this is just another short trip, just another day. So what was going to be probably 45 days turned into 137.
Well, Lawrence, we've got a question from the chat room now. Guest number 6 says, do you think they are jealous of America and Americans? And they didn't specify a country, so that must be a general question. Is there a lot of jealousy of America and Americans?
Caller number 6, I don't know if you would call it jealousy, because unless you have aspirations, like revolutions come from rising expectations. Unless you have expectations of being like an American or American style of living, you're not going to be jealous of Americans. But I tell you what, everybody wants to go to America. The poorest of the poor in a country like Malawi, for example, where you can drive past an entire village with nobody working, everybody hungry, and 3 pairs of sandals in the whole village. If you stop in for food or for a potty break or something like that, they still want to go to America. They may not understand but 3 words of English, but 3 of them will be, you help me go to America, yes? And so that remains pretty universal. Everybody wants to go to America still. Maybe a few exceptions. Maybe the Europeans really don't want to relocate here all that much. They've got a pretty high standard of living. But even in Asia, which has an amazing growth in the standard of living, huge numbers of people want to go to the United States. I think that they still recognize freedom and opportunity here. And of course, a good number of them have a illusion of being a rock star or a media star or a Kardashian or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say jealous, not necessarily, no.
And guest 6 says, that is so sad. I can understand that because my family came here from Ireland because of the potato famine. And indeed, we did get a lot of immigrants here, because of the living standards, the starvation. And this is the land of opportunity still. It's still perceived that way worldwide, isn't it?
Yes, it is, absolutely. And Rich, I think you lied to me about your age, because if your family came here because of the potato famine, that puts you in remarkable territory.
That was guest number 6 again. I was reading from the chat room.
Okay, all right.
No, and maybe in a past life, who knows?
There we go. I'm a firm believer in that.
Well, tell me about your future travel plans. Do you have another itinerary set up? Are you going to be going out again in the near future?
Well, that's always dependent upon money, and that's why, of course, I hope to have absolutely scathing, scandalous record book sales for True North, the ultimate around-the-world journey. But, you can't mandate that. So this last trip cost about $35,000, and you can't cobble that together every couple of months necessarily. if I did a better job of cheating the government, I think that I could, but I'm still a rookie in that regard. So it takes time to put the planning together. For example, there was 8 months of solid planning for this trip. And the next trip that I've got planned is going to be even more complicated. I'll tell you about it in a minute. But then, of course, it takes a while to pile up the money for that also. But I hope to go to Oceania. For one thing, Australia is the only continent that I haven't been on. Been on all the others, including Antarctica. But I've not been to Australia. So Oceania encompasses French Polynesia, New Zealand, Australia, all those famous battle sites in the Pacific, the Marshall, Gilbert, Solomon Islands, that famous Tarawa, so many others. They've since become nations in the United Nations, and they may be 4 feet above sea level on the average, and they may have a population of 5,000, but they're a country with a vote equal to what the U.S. has in the UN. So I wanted to see a lot of these places. And then Southeast Asia, your classic Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and the Philippines. So that, I think that's between all of them somewhere around 22 countries. But the logistics, Rich, are more difficult than this last trip. They had definite airfare flight schedules, and some of these places in the Pacific, that old quote, "You can't get there from here." You know what I mean? You may be right next to it. Like, you can be right next to French Guiana in South America, in Brazil, but you can't get there. You got to fly another couple thousand miles to the west and to go into Caracas, Venezuela, in order to come backwards one island at a time or something to get into French Guiana. Well, it's like that in the Pacific. You may be right next to it, but there's no airline going there. So you got to take an airline going backwards, then take an airline past this country, and then come back from a different direction. Or take a tramp steamer in that takes 7 days, for example. And then you spend a couple of days there and then 7 days going back out. And you did that. You lost 2 weeks for one island. So the logistics on this trip are much more difficult to arrange. It requires a lot more research.
Well, will there be another book detailing those travels, a True North of Volume 4, perhaps?
You can count on that. Volume 1 was about South America, Easter Island, and
Antarctica.
All of South America, and parts of the Caribbean. Volume 2 was about all of Central America, Cuba while it was still illegal, and Mexico for the end of time ceremony. But I pulled that one back for rewriting because it had such a spiritual element to it that I didn't feel was really getting in the first time. And so I'm reworking that to put in quite a bit of commentary and exposure on modern spirituality.
Will it be re-released on Amazon and elsewhere?
Yes. When I'm ready. I'm not ready yet. This one kind of leapfrogged. This was such an incredible adventure. This one sort of leapfrogged ahead of that one, knowing that I could always come back to it because it's largely written. It just needed to be reworked. Needed to have a new focus. And the focus is the emergence of modern spirituality kind of at the expense of traditional religions.